Hello, my name is Tamara Lanier, and I am the third generation granddaughter of the enslaved man Congo Renty. And the purpose of this recording this evening is to share with you something that I have never really shared publicly. Actually, only the members of my family, my immediate family, have been privileged to hear some of the audio recordings that I have of my mother talking about Papa Renty. So, for the purposes of this recording this afternoon, I'd like to share with you a small audio of my mom talking about Renty and the Blak speller. Now, historically, the slaves used the Blak speller to teach themselves to read. And not only did they teach themselves to read, but they also taught others to read. And that's a part of my family history. That's a part of Renty's legacy that I have struggled for years to promote and to have told. And so here's a small piece of my mother talking about that. And then after it's played, I'll come back and I'll explain a little more.
After he stood and stood, we never would believe that Webster, he was everywhere. But he hollered that he wanted to go. Did he have to take the test after he studied the book? I don't know that. No, he didn't take the test. Just like when he got to eat that night. He did that book and study. He didn't know, and he wanted to know what was in that book. And he wanted to be educated enough to do that book. And he studied like everybody else.
Okay, so that's my mom talking about Renty finishing the Blak Webster. And as I said earlier, I have a number of different clips of my mom talking. I have my mom talking about Renty and his enslavement. I have my mom talking about slaves on the plantation and how they secretly, not only were they secretly teaching themselves to read, but they were also secretly holding on to their culture. And one part of that was their religious ceremonies. And my mom is talking about how slaves would hide away and worship, and how slaves would hide away and sing hymns in their own native tongues, and that they did that out of fear of being caught, and that if they were caught, that they would be punished. And we talk about religion. And what's also interesting is, my mom talked about Renty and his literacy. And she talked about that often. That was something that she was so very proud of. Not only that Renty learned to read and taught himself to read using the Blak Webster, but she also talked about the fact that he was a religious person who would teach people from the Bible. And what's also unique about these oral recordings of my mother is that I have oral recordings and written documents from Dr. Edmund Taylor, where he also talks about the literacy of the slaves on the Taylor plantation, and that some of them read and some of them were educated, and also that some of them were ministers. And this is the same story that I'm hearing from my mother about who Papa Renty was. And so the sad irony for me is the frustrations that I have had trying to encourage or convince Harvard to tell that part of Renty's story. It was particularly important because if you remember the propaganda that was proposed by Louis Agassiz, is that slaves were not even 3/5 of a person, that they had the intellectual capability of a 7-month-old fetus in the womb of its mother. And so what I think, not only the irony of it, but the historical significance of disputing Louis Agassiz's scientific racism is the subjects that he used completely negated the propaganda, the narrative, and turned it on its head, because the people that he was using to promote scientific racism were in fact educated, literate people who not only were their self-taught, but then went on to teach other people. So what an amazing part of a story that Harvard chooses to ignore and deny Renty and Delia. Because for me, when you acknowledge that, you not only dispute that false narrative, but you restore to them some small measure of their dignity. And I think that that was so important. And it was so frustrating, and it is so frustrating to me that Harvard will not embrace that story.